Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. For reasons that are going to be very obvious, this is going to be a very interesting episode. But before we get into that, as this episode comes out, there will be another poll in my community tab. Essentially, every week I'm doing like polls or whatever for the community tab, I guess to gauge audience or whatever. I'm saying what this poll will be about in the episode because this actually details what will happen for the next episode. You see, because the next episode that is going to come out is going to be a foreign election episode. The problem is, I don't necessarily know what foreign election to talk about. You see, originally I had a different one. I had a completely different one in mind, but then I moved that one down the road, and I originally intended to replace it with something else. I don't know exactly which one I wanted to replace it with, but the one that I tried to settle on for the next one would be a episode about the upcoming 2 gubernatorial elections in Mexico. However, recently some news stories came out that are very interesting and could detail some very interesting endeavors about the upcoming Turkish election. I didn't really consider that one to be very big and very important because reasons that might be obvious if you know anything about Turkish politics. But recently I've been seeing things that are like, this actually might be interesting. So I'm going to leave this up to the audience. Which election do you want me to cover? Do you want me to cover the upcoming Mexican elections or the Turkish elections? And this isn't going to be one of those ones where it's like, oh, I can cover both. No, because the way the elections are coming out, I have to pick one or the other. I cannot pick both. So by all means, pick the one that you would rather watch me cover. All right, with that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, foreign news. Something very interesting is going on in the Colombian political system. Gustavo Petro, the incumbent president, has made some major shifts in his cabinet. Let me explain. If you remember, Gustavo Petro is the first leftist president of Colombia in its history, and that has led to a lot of interesting things. People were curious to see how would he run the country, especially with all of these like pro-capitalist opposition groups, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the Party of the U, because all those three are like the Colombian political establishment, and none of them wanted to support him, of course, for obvious reasons. In fact, all three of them, I think, actually joined up in an opposition coalition to try and boost the profile of his opponent in the general election, but of course he managed to win the election regardless. But what was extremely interesting was that immediately after he won, all three of those parties decided to bend the knee to Petro and all announced that they would join with him in a unity government where they would give their support to him in the legislative chamber because he had like a very slim majority which could easily be outmaneuvered by a large opposition bloc. So in exchange for them supporting him, they basically said, like, give us a couple of cabinet positions. And he was like, yeah, sure, whatever. But of course, what ended up happening was the people in his cabinet from those opposition parties, to a degree, were holding him back. So what he decided to do was announce that he would be getting rid of a lot of those people who were holding him back and would replace them with people of his own party and coalition members, like actual members of his historic pact coalition, and that could hopefully reinvigorate his agenda moving forward. Now, I saw that this was a lot of members of his cabinet, and I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of all the members of his cabinet that they were replacing, but from the two that I did see, were 2 people from the Liberal Party. Overall, I do agree that he should have probably replaced them with people who can actually push for the agenda that he wants, which is an agenda that I probably agree with. Speaking of agendas that I agree with, recently, Minnesota has done something very interesting that some people are saying might have larger political ramifications than even they might realize. The Minnesota House and Senate voted to legalize recreational marijuana for people 21 and older. The House vote on it was pretty overwhelming, 71 to 59, with 2 Republicans joining with the Democrats to legalize it. And I think it said 2 Democrats flipped to oppose it. But in the Minnesota Senate, it was 34-33, which is basically a party line vote. But the numbers really don't matter. What matters is that it's being voted on. And judging by the fact that Tim Walz' Wikipedia page literally says that he advocates for the legalization of recreational cannabis, I'm going to take a wild guess and say that this bill will be signed. And many people are saying that Minnesota's taken a lot of W's. He passed a bill that affirmed abortion care. He also passed a bill that guaranteed that children in schools could get food, which is pretty common. This is a very common trend in Minnesota. Minnesota is well known for its trend of center left populist type figures. Keith Ellison, Paul Wellstone, Eugene McCarthy, Floyd Olson, though I guess technically he's a little bit more than just center left, considering he's a borderline socialist. But either way, again, this is just that common trend of the center left progressive type figures in that state. The modern day Democratic Party in that state is literally supposed to be the, I guess, furthest left Democratic Party in the nation. It's supposed to be, because it's literally them merging with a socialist party. Though I guess weirdly the same thing happened in North Dakota, even though that, I don't know what the heck happened with that. But the biggest question that I had some people wondering is, if legal weed is almost inevitable in Minnesota, then what the heck is going to happen to their two pro-legalization parties, the Legal Marijuana Now Party and the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party? Those are two parties that have gotten very notable in that state for a number of reasons, not all of which are positive. As the name suggests, they of course advocate for the legalization of marijuana, but they've also been known for being a little bit of Republican astroturf, because the Republican Party keeps trying to push people in these two parties to run in very close Democratic seats, thereby guaranteeing that the Republican would win. Some of the more egregious examples are including where they got Adam Weeks to run in Minnesota District 2, and then, when he died, they kept trying to make sure that he remained on the ballot no matter what. Then one that might be a lot more egregious to people is when the Republican Party literally tricked a blind and disabled veteran to run as a Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party candidate against the Democrats. They literally just tricked him. They just said, oh yeah, we work with the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party, even though they were the Republican Party, who was, again, astroturfing that race. He was a blind, disabled veteran with Gulf War syndrome, and the Republican Party was literally just we're just going to exploit this man. Although I guess I shouldn't be that surprised, the Republican Party exploiting veterans. What else is new? But not every candidate who ran as people of the Legal Marijuana Now Party or the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party were, again, Republican astroturf. Sometimes they were Democratic astroturf to try and supplant and get rid of, the parties. There was this one time where there was a battle where one of the two parties, I forget which one, wanted to change their name to something like the MAGA Party. They wanted to change their name, and it was gonna be like a acronym where it'd be MAGA, but it would be printed on the thing as how the Legal Marijuana Now Party is printed as LMN Party, but the acronym would be something that would, of course, indicate that, again, they support marijuana. But the Republican astroturf and the Democratic astroturf were fighting each other. I think I covered this in a previous episode. Remind me if I have or haven't. But the thing is, what happens next? With marijuana legalization inevitably coming, what's going to happen next? Well, we don't really know. That's kind of the thing. Whenever these single issue parties have their single issue solved, what happens next? There are some of them that just flat out go away, like the Marijuana Party in Canada. As soon as Canada legalized marijuana, their one issue was solved, so they just left. At least on a national level, there's still some smaller state or not state, province and local affiliates that are still around. But then you also get ones like the Brexit Party. They got their one issue, and then they just reformed and started something completely different, which you might not even remember because you might be wait, they still do things? Yeah, they still are there and they still advocate. And UKIP, they got their thing too, and they're still around. What might end up happening is they might change their names and then move on to other issues, or they might just go away. If I had to take a wild guess, the Republican astroturf will try their best to make sure the parties stay around, but all the real actual activists in the party will just kind of go away, so there really is no further point, but we'll have to wait and see. Speaking of things that we'll have to wait and see on, interesting thing happened in Montana. If you've been paying attention to the news recently, a transgender lawmaker by the name of Zooey Zephyr has been making headlines around the nation because the Republicans who are in charge of the Montana House of Representatives voted to formally punish her, formally announcing that they're basically silencing her for the remainder of her term She's not allowed to take part in meetings. She's not allowed to raise debate on certain issues. In fact, she's technically banned from voting. She can vote remotely for legislation, but she cannot vote, like, on actuality. Now, many people are seeing this as what it is. Like, this is just the Republican Party admitting that they're fascist. And if you don't believe me, 14 characteristics of fascism right here. Powerful and continuing nationalism. Yeah, literally, these guys are the most nationalistic people in U.S. politics. Disdain for the recognition of human rights. They literally advocate for mass genocide of trans people and LGBTQ people and whatever. So, yes. Identification of enemies / scapegoats as a unifying cause. Take a number. They've done it to everybody. They've done it to gays. They've done it to leftists. They've done it to socialists. They've done it to China, Russia, whatever. Supremacy of the military. These are the guys that will raise the military budget extensively and will pretend that they give a shit about veterans, even though they don't. Rampant sexism. Again, this is just very common with conservatism and whatever. Literally, prominent conservative activists are literally trying to get rid of women's rights, both with the whole abortion thing, but also with the fact that a lot of conservative activists are literally just flat out saying that they don't want women to have the right to vote anymore. Controlled mass media. Granted, they technically don't own state media, but then again, we also have Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax that are very much in that sort of mentality. We'll leave this one as a blank for now. Obsession with national security. Again, pick a number, whatever, like, enemy is considered the evil one. There's always this rampant up, like, we need to push for national security. Religion and government are intertwined. These guys are basically theocrats. Corporate power is protected. These guys love corporations. Labor power is suppressed. These guys really hate organized labor. Disdain for intellectuals in the arts. Aren't these the same people that literally say every day, like, oh, this is woke media. Obsession with crime and punishment. These are the parties of law and order. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Wow, the GOP definitely meets that remark a lot. Fraudulent elections. These are the ones that want to gerrymander, suppress votes, and do everything in their power to make sure that less people have the ability to vote, thereby increasing their likability. So, yes, even if you want to say 6 doesn't count, 13 out of 14 ain't a good look. But there are some people who see this as a little more hopeful because this member of the Montana legislature, they're getting a lot of support for their endeavors, and a lot of people are protesting to make sure that the GOP of Montana sees that this is bad. Plus, this combined with a lot of other things like Fox News apparently like trying to move away from the far right, and then also Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel basically announced that he's not going to be funding Republicans in the upcoming election because he's like, this is just getting ridiculous. A lot of people are just turning away. Like AOC made a speech where she was like, this is literally just, they're on their last leg. And maybe you're saying like, look, all the GOP is doing is literally just making the future Democratic Party. Like, the Tennessee 3 are like now nationwide figures, and so is Zooey. I ain't trying to get my hopes up because I know that things might not necessarily be that good, because like I'm on the thing where it's like, I don't know. It's like, yes, 2016 might be a fluke, but also maybe 2024 is a fluke too. There ain't nothing else for me to say that won't get this channel taken down, so let's just move on to the next story, which is actually very relevant to 2024. But not the race that you think. It's the West Virginia seat. Jim Justice kicks off campaign for Joe Manchin's pivotal Senate seat. So for those who don't necessarily understand this, let me explain. You see, Jim Justice is the incumbent Republican governor of West Virginia, but he hasn't always been a Republican. He was in fact elected as a Democrat. He was basically a Democrat in the same vein that Joe Manchin is currently, but he just basically made the decision to just flip to the Republican Party. And he was originally like, did this because of Donald Trump, but now it seems that this race is going to be another one of those races where like it's going to be the tensions between the pro-Trump and anti-Trump wing of the GOP. And I think this might actually be just how the rest of the like nation is going to be for the race, because a lot of the pro-Trump people, like, they have been very much openly admitting they wanted to back Alex Mooney. And all the anti-Trump Republicans are trying to, well, not all of them, but like a decent number of the people who are supposedly anti-Trump are going to be trying to back Jim Justice. Even ones that are like Lindsey Graham. Like Lindsey Graham is backing Jim Justice. I don't necessarily know if he's identified himself as like an anti-Trump Republican anymore. Maybe he is going to go back into that crowd now, because it's one of those things where it's like some people campaigned as like the anti-Trump Republicans, but then when Trump became president, they became super pro-Trump. But then now that he's no longer president and that he's now a detriment to the GOP, now a lot of Republicans who were like originally anti-Trump are now going back to being anti-Trump. And it looks like this is going to be one of those races that might actually be one of those things. And what makes this one very interesting is the fact that this is for Joe Manchin's seat, obviously, but Joe Manchin hasn't even made an announcement on if he's planning to run for re-election. Now, he stated that he would win any race he enters, but they don't necessarily know what race he intends to enter, because he's in fact currently being floated for 3 seats right now. He's being floated for his Senate seat that he holds currently, but he's also being floated for the gubernatorial seat that he used to hold, but he's also being floated for one more seat that I'm going to get into in a second. But I'll be upfront and say I don't think he's going to be running for that last one. I think those first 2 are going to be the most likely opportunities. And the fact of the matter is, this seat would be the most likely for him to run in, but look at the polling for these races, and you'll see certain things that you would obviously understand given the last election cycle. Joe Manchin versus Patrick Morrisey, who was also at one point being floated as like an anti-Trump candidate. Manchin won both times. Alex Mooney, Manchin wins 2 of the 3 polls, but the last poll has Jim Justice versus Joe Manchin, and Justice wins 2 of those polls. Now you might say, well, that means it's pretty obvious that Justice would be the most likely person to win against Joe Manchin. And this is where I should say this. There really is not that much functional difference between Jim Justice and Joe Manchin. Those 2 are essentially, like I said, like Jim Justice was originally a like Democrat, like conservative Democrat. That was who he was. I've seen some people say like, oh, he's like more moderate than Joe Manchin, but it's like, no, he only looks that way by comparison because he's a Republican. I see literally no functional difference between Joe Manchin and Jim Justice. The only difference I could see is maybe on certain smaller party line votes, he would vote for, like, obviously the Republican line as opposed to the Democratic line. But the thing is, there are a lot of things that people would think are Democratic Party line votes that Manchin just doesn't vote with the Democrats on. So it's like, really, again, no functional difference. And this stinks even more so considering Manchin is one of the 2 or 3 seats that people are saying is, like, the key to maintaining the Senate. Brief tangent on the Senate races, Senate update. I might make this a separate section. We're still a while away, but of course, people are getting ready for those races. 34 Senate seats are up for grabs. 20 Democrats, 3 independents, and 11 Republicans. So right off the bat, Democrats already have more to lose. And what is worse, at this early in the stage, those 11 seats for the Republicans are considered all safe red. You may get a likely here and there, like, for example, the Florida seat is considered likely, and one polling thing says Texas is likely, but not fully. 12 of those Democratic seats are considered safe D, and 2 of the 3 independents are considered safe. And as we all know, those 3 independents caucus the Democrats, so Dems have a lot of safe seats as well. But remember, all of those battleground seats, or leans, whatevers, those are all Democrat held, and a lot of people are a bit worried, but bit by bit, the worries start to go away. Kane is considered pretty safe. Like, he's technically flippable, but, broadly most people think he's safe. Michigan, despite being a swing seat, but also one that is open, it's still broadly considered pretty Dem-leaning. Nevada, similar worries, but again, broadly considered D-leaning. Casey, again, very considered D-leaning. Baldwin, again, pretty Dem-leaning. But then it's those last 4 that have people worrying. First, we got John Tester, one of those, like, moderate candidates in a red-leaning state that somehow managed to survive in the 2018 midterms alongside Manchin. Now, when I originally compared the two, I was originally a bit more mad and like, oh, Tester is bad as well. But then after doing some further research, I'm like, you know what, Tester's actually not that bad. Like, I mean, he's not good by a lot of like a long thing, but there are some things that are like, oh, this is actually interesting. For starters, being more loyal on SCOTUS judges immediately earns him a lot of favorability when Manchin can't even do that. And he's been a more consistent voter for like D issues. But then bigger one that I think is interesting that I learned in was when he said that he was open to the idea of a single payer system. It's like, I don't care that he like voted against it when Mitch McConnell came to put it together for a vote. I don't care. The fact that he's willing to say that he's open to it does 10 more miles for him than any of the other like people in his crowd. The next one is Sherrod Brown in Ohio. Now, that one is a broad toss-up all the way, but I honestly don't see it flipping that much, honestly. Now, that kind of mentality very much leads to a lot of bad things, like where you think, oh, this is a safe seat anyway, so why bother? And then turns out, no, you should have been paying attention. That's what happened to the 2018 massacre of the Democratic majority. The biggest toss-up I can honestly see is Arizona, because that one has Kyrsten Sinema and prominent Democrat Ruben Gallego in the mix. So many people are saying maybe this will be a spoiler thing, but I don't necessarily think so. I think the state has steadily leaned blue, so Gallego definitely has it in the bag. Maybe Sinema could pull votes away from him, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think Gallego really does have it in for him. I think Sinema really just, like, if she was a popular state, like if it were like a Bernie or an Angus King, maybe, but she literally has ruined all of her political capital. It's like, what are you even doing? Angus King and Bernie, she is not. But lastly, of course, we have Manchin, and sadly, he's the only one of these guys that has the word flip next to him. And yeah, even though he's still considered mostly toss-up, there is like a lot of indication that he's going to be the only one that flips. Very bad, but the thing is, like, there really is not much else he can do. Honestly, it's a lost cause. Literally the only thing I can think of is maybe if the Democrats can try and get one of those areas that were blue originally before 2018 to flip back to them. That's the only route I could see them really having at victory, but that is an incredibly hard route to do. But with the Democratic strategy of trying to find the right person immediately as soon as they enter the race, maybe it could happen. Like, if the Dems really want to win, they're going to have to focus their attention on, like, again, like, they need to focus their attention on Arizona, Montana, West Virginia, and Ohio. Obviously, those are the biggest ones. But they also need to focus their attention on at least one of those states prior to 2018 that were blue. They need to focus on one of those states. My money would be on either Florida or Missouri. And I'm only saying Missouri because I like a candidate in Missouri, Lucas Kunz. Like, that's the only reason why. Because they need to make sure, like, because if they don't do that, their best case scenario is just another 50-50 split. And then you have to hedge all your bets on the presidential election, and that's not necessarily a thing. You need to make sure that the presidential election isn't the only thing you're hedging your bets on. I'll probably make like a full graph kind of explaining what I mean, but we'll just get into the next topic, the biggest topic. This is one that was kind of obvious from the get-go, but you know, Joe Biden has officially announced that he is going to be running for a second term, even though he pledged to only serve one term, and that was kind of like one of the big things of his presidential campaign initially, that he would only serve one term. Of course, with certain things happening, you know, Democrats apparently outperforming their expectations and a lot of other things, making Biden, of course, the one that they think is going to be the candidate for the next election. And yeah, I mean, for the most part, yeah, that literally is really one big thing. Like, because for better and for worse, you have to say this. You have to admit this. Biden is the only candidate that can say that he has beaten Donald Trump. He's the only candidate that can say that. So that's really the only route they have for him being the nominee. And one thing that was interesting is like the second that Joe Biden announced, the entire Democratic Party primary Wikipedia page essentially just got extremely small, because basically every single person who was floated as a potential, because everybody knows this is what was happening behind the scenes, Like, while people were telling Biden both, we support you for re-election, but then also gearing up for potential election bids should he choose to retire. With most people literally, like, when the media would go to them asking them about their potential 2024 ambitions, they would literally point blank say, like, I am not really going to be talking about it because if Biden runs, I'll support him, but then when things go around, if it doesn't end up happening, maybe I'll look into it. And sure enough, essentially everybody who was speculated on disappeared. There are only 2 people left that are in the speculative category for president. It's Joe Manchin and Nina Turner. Now, there were a lot of other people that were on the Our Campaigns one, but that's because this is the weird thing, like, they float people around, and then they never get a formal retraction, so then those people just end up going away. But apparently the time frame still has Manchin and Turner in contention. Now, I don't think either of them are going to end up running. For Manchin, it's because he has no point. There's really no reason for him to run for president when he has both a gubernatorial seat that he could win and also a Senate seat that Democrats are probably trying to push him really hard to run for. And Nina, hear me now, quote me later, Nina's going to endorse Marianne Williamson. She's either going to, because she's been going on Twitter essentially essentially endorsing Marianne. Like, she's been tweeting basically a ton of things pro Marianne, retweeting a lot of Marianne's campaign posts. It's like she's essentially endorsed Marianne already, but she hasn't formally done so. And I think that's what the people are waiting on. They're waiting on her to officially endorse Marianne, to remove her from contention, especially considering Nina really did float the idea of her running for president. So it's like, maybe? But, of course, we've had a lot of people have very strong reactions to this announcement, especially considering certain things have happened. One thing that was announced was that Biden apparently is not really good at making campaign appearances anymore, so he's toned down the amount of campaign appearances he's going to be making, and how the Democratic Party has announced that they're going to be shutting down debates. Wait, as a leftist newscaster, I'm, like, supposed to be shocked at this revelation? That makes no sense. Like, this is just a common thing. Like, this is what happens every time a incumbent president announces a run for re-election. Unless they have, like, an actual viable person to run against them, they're not really going to pay attention to any primary bids. That's what Trump did in 2020. That's what Obama did in 2012. That's what Bush did in 2004. That's what Clinton did in 1996. That's what FDR did in 1944 and in 1936. That's what LBJ did in 1964. I mean, I've literally made an entire sub-series basically explaining this viewpoint many times over. I have to be completely stupid to not even understand this simple concept that has been repeated over and over again. Huh? That's just what left tubers are supposed to do? They're supposed to, like, forget these things that are just commonplace? Well, okay then. Oh my goodness! This big revelation. Oh my goodness. Joe Biden doesn't want to debate the fucking anti-vax cracknut, and then this random other anti-vax person that got like 5% in the last race? Oh my goodness, I can't believe that Joe Biden doesn't want to, like, do this. I can't believe this. I can't believe the incumbent president just doesn't want to engage in primary challenges that he has no reason to engage. In other shocking news, Joe Biden doesn't want to debate Jerome Segal. I am absolute, like, and again, there's another thing that made people really mad about this that, again, infuriates me. Kyle Kalinske and Cristobal, a couple of other people, have stated, like, they made videos talking about how Bernie Sanders isn't endorsing Marianne Williamson's bid for the presidency, and he instead announced that he was going to be supporting Joe Biden, a thing that he literally said he was going to do. But again, a thing he literally stated he was going to do. Like, I hate this. I hate this. I hate the fact that people keep getting mad at Bernie for doing things he says he's going to do. Like, he said in 2016 that he would support Hillary Clinton if she became the Democratic Party nominee. Because that is a thing that he has done historically since the 1984 election. Then he says that he's going to do the same thing to Joe Biden. Again, why are they shocked? And then he says, oh, I will run for president myself if Joe Biden doesn't seek re-election. If he does seek re-election, I'll endorse his re-election bid. And they're shocked again that he's not endorsing Marianne Williamson. It's like, Crystal Ball even made, like, the title of her video was just the biggest, like, what? She said, Bernie betrayed the movement. It's like, the movement is not Marianne Williamson 2024. That's not the movement. You're claiming it's the movement. You're pretending it's the movement. It's not the movement. Here are the people who are endorsing Marianne Williamson 2024. Here are the people who are endorsing Marianne Williamson 2024. Podcasters and Twitter users. These are the people who are endorsing and backing Marianne Williamson 2024. Not actual activists. And even if they are backing Williamson, they're not doing it publicly. They're not saying Marianne Williamson 2024. It's infuriating. And what's even more infuriating is that I had this freaking guy just DM me out of nowhere. And he got mad at me because I've been criticizing Marianne Williamson 2024. And it's like, I hate that these people are mad at me for criticizing Marianne Williamson for president in 2024. And it's like, I have literally always stated this in regards to the Marianne Williamson 2024 bid. It's not my fault that you guys are choosing to pay attention to me after she announced that she's running. I said all this shit before she started running. I was saying this was a bad idea for her to run. I literally don't care how loud Kyle or Crystal or whatever the other people are going to do. I don't care how loud they're going to be with their freaking, like, Marianne Williamson 2024. I don't care about whoever the other people are. There are a lot of people that's like, I don't even understand. And they do this weird thing where it's like, I hate this. It's like, it's honestly hard to put into words because it's just, here's like the saddest fact of the matter. A lot of the people who are backing Marianne Williamson 2024, they're just people just biding their time doing whatever. They're literally just people who just want to waste their time. Like, objectively true. Objective fact, the people who are endorsing Marianne Williamson and loudly supporting Marianne Williamson, you are just actively choosing to waste your time. And if you just say, yeah, I just want to support a candidacy for whatever reason, it's like, by all means, you're free to do that. But you need to stop pretending it's a litmus test. You need to stop being mad at people who are criticizing Marianne Williamson. I've said, like, this is a tweet that I said. I'm gonna retweet it right now, just so I could do this. Unironically, Marianne Williamson supporters are more delusional than John Wolfe Jr. supporters in 2012. That is an objective fact. Objective fact. John Wolfe Jr. supporters, he was like this nobody to begin with, and he had nowhere to go but up. What's weird is that a lot of Marianne Williamson supporters, they're literally saying that their only route to even remote victory is her winning in New Hampshire. It's like, guys, New Hampshire was moved. It's not even the first state anymore. Like, you're not even trying to win the first state in the union. Like, winning New Hampshire, the reason why that was important is it was the first state. It was the first test to see if you were a viable candidate. And she's putting all of her effort into New Hampshire still. She did that in the last cycle, and she got 99 votes. This was her strategy the last cycle, too. You know this, right? That was her last, that was the last thing. Like, she was putting all of her effort into Iowa and New Hampshire. She didn't even make it to Iowa. And in New Hampshire, she got 99 votes. And again, like, I just hate this the Marianne Williamson people. They're like a literal cult. You bring up any single criticism of Marianne Williamson, automatically it's just like, you're pro-leftist infighting. Like, this is the one that I was going to bring up. Like, this random freaking loser, Dieter Pilon, this random freaking Canadian Green Party candidate who, like, came into my DMs a couple of times because he was like, please put me on our campaigns. And it's like, whatever. I barely interacted with him, but yet he kept, like, coming to my DMs for reasons. I don't want to be too mean because there's a chance that doing so might be ableist. In fact, in retrospect, a lot of the interactions that I have with him would make a lot more sense if that were the case. And I'm saying this here and now so that you can understand that that is not my intention if that is the case. Considering the likes that I have on my thread on this issue, I think I'm in the clear. So anyways, this guy comes into my DMs out of nowhere, says, why don't you support Marianne Williamson? Don't tell me you're part of the fake grifter left that support Biden or even worse, Steve Bannon-backed RFK Jr. And I said, I don't back any of them. Marianne Williamson is anti-vaxxer. She isn't. I link a CNN article where it explains her very interesting history with the anti-vax movement and say she is. He replies, lol, CNN, corporate media. I say, lol, is the information wrong? He says it was in 2012. He sends me a CNN article, trying to make sense of she said she's in the clear. She said she changed her mind on these issues. It's okay now, even though there wasn't a actual her changing her stance on the issues. It was she said these things, and then when it came back to bite her in the ass, she then went, "Oh, actually, I don't stand by those positions anymore. Those were a long time ago. Calm down." But since he sent a CNN article, I immediately responded with, "Lol, CNN, corporate media." He responds, "Corporate media tries to cancel us progressives all the time." I say, "How about her backpedaling on Medicare for All?" And I link the Kyle Kulinski video where he shows her backpedaling on Medicare for All, because I think that's a relatively important thing to talk about when you're saying she's this champion of Medicare for All. He responds, in her current platform, there's Medicare for All. That's all that matters. If Marianne wins NH, that's already a huge message, or some counties even. I respond, no, it's not. Literally, how can I support someone who is not consistent on an issue? Literally, it's oh, she said she opposed Medicare for All. That's a long time ago. It's no, that's the last cycle. And it's always this weird thing where it's if it's politicians they don't like, they'll dig up literally every single old comment and thing that they made and then use that as proof that this politician or political figure is inconsistent on an issue. But then when it's a political figure that they like, all of a sudden, when you bring up these exact same issues, all of a sudden you're being mean, you're being wrong, you're smearing them. Example, 2016, Hillary Clinton supports gay marriage, but she has a long-standing record opposing the issue. I don't recall people back then saying, she said that a long time ago, she's changed her stances on the issues. What I did see is people rightfully criticize her for making a massive shift in the strategy and the platform. Right as soon as public opinion changed, they respond, but what do I know? I'm in Quebec, right? Lol. And I was clearly seeing that the conversation was going nowhere, so I decided to say something again, because they seem to be making a snide remark about themselves, so I decided to make a snide remark as well, just about this. I apparently typed up a lot, but let me explain what the message is actually supposed to say. And as a Canadian Green, I know winning and consistency are not really things that you are in favor of, but down here, both of those are very important. Mocking the whole fact that the Canadian Green Party is a little bit of a shit show. And he took that really well by responding, shut the fuck up. Literally, I'm in politics to defend a cause, not win. I respond, how can you defend it by losing? With no power, you can't do anything. And you literally came into my DMs. You can't tell me to shut up. This is the weirdest thing. This happens all the time on Twitter. People will reply to me, and then when I reply back, they get mad at me and are like, shut up, shut up, shut up. It's why did you reply to me? Why are you here? I don't understand this. 442 votes won't get climate change solved. All I sent was a question in good faith, and now you're attacking me. It's you told me to shut the fuck up. That's when I started getting mean. And 442 is actually 442 times bigger than the 0, which is what you got. That's funny because, one, I guarantee you that if I ran as any politician, I could get more votes than him. And two, if he wants to play a number game, I have more subs than people he actually got to vote for him. So I responded with my answer, but then you told me to shut the fuck up. Yes, because it came off as incredibly rude and condescending. Why be so smug? And I said, well, I literally wasn't until you just shrugged off a source, then used literally the same one to prove your point. And at this point, this is when I realized maybe I should include an asterisk saying that I'm not trying to be ableist when I'm talking about this person. Because at no point before he told me to shut the fuck up was I being condescending or smug. I don't get it. I know I can be smug and condescending, but I was not in that conversation up until he started, up until he literally shrugged my source. And even then, I was still trying to be, good faith in my analysis and whatever. But that's where the conversation basically just trails off from Marianne Williamson, so I'm not really going to get into that. But we're way off topic, so let's just move on to the main topic so that we can get back into focus. This one's going to be interesting because this is my first international. Now, we all know there are a lot of political organizations that are national, local, whatever, but there are some political organizations that stem beyond a nation's borders, and they're called internationals. Now, the thing about internationals is that basically all of them are left-wing. Very few of them are not left-wing. Like, left-wing groups are basically what started the idea of an international organization of politics. Most other ones, like, there were really no other political organizations that really did want to stem across the world. The left were usually one of the first ones that wanted to do it. I mean, think about it. One of the whole points of the Communist Manifesto is literally proletarians of all countries unite, or workers of the world unite. So, like, literally the whole point of their ideology is to fight for the global working class. So most, if not all, of the internationals are left-wing. Granted, we now have internationals that are not left-wing, like the Christian Democrat International. But as I said, majority of them are left-wing. The first attempt to have a worldwide left-wing international is the International Working Men's Association, but ideological differences between all the left-wing factions caused them to split up. Then, in 1889, this is where more formal left-wing action took place. Like, the last one, it was like, sort of like, it wasn't necessarily left-wing, but it was like left-wing wink wink nudge nudge. Like, left-wing political thought really did not start until like around that time, like before the Civil War. 1848, like, there were like inklings and like ideas that would then be merged into what would be known as modern day leftist thought. Well, not even modern day, but you know, what would begin the trend of modern day leftist thought. And of course, there needed to be time for it to grow and develop. 1889 was when they thought they were starting to get more developed and starting to look past certain differences. So a second international was formed. And for a while, things were going great until the Bolshevik Revolution and World War I, which basically made a lot of the tendencies start shifting away from each other. Depending on your interpretation, some interpret it as Lenin leading a group of anti-imperialist leftists outside of the group, but the more actual, like more definitive one is the divide between reformists and revolutionaries, because up to that point, reformism and revolutionary politics were both just theories. Like, they were both just left-wing theories. Nobody had actually done praxis on both of those things yet. Well, reformism, I guess, technically, because there were some left-wing organizations that were forming as parties in certain areas and winning elections. But it was sort of this like thing where it's like the revolutionaries were like, dude, this is taking too long. We need to like actually do something bigger than this. And like, dude, this small, tiny, like winning certain seats at certain times, this is the only route we're going to get to leftism, especially with the Paris Commune sort of being seen as like a huge failure. But then the Bolshevik Revolution happened. And now we saw people that were like, and now a lot of the revolutionary organizations were like, dude, wait, we could actually do revolutions. This is awesome. But the reformists were a bit hesitant at first because they were, of course, naturally opposed to any sort of like bloodshed. But then they started looking into how the Bolshevik Soviet Union was, and they're like, we're not necessarily fans of certain things. Like, you're doing this thing, like killing all these anarchists? That's kind of weird. That's kind of cringe, dude. To which the Bolshevik faction would then be like, you're just trying to uphold the status quo. So inevitably both organizations were just like, yeah, this just ain't working. So they just yeeted away from each other. And eventually, in 1923, Labor and Socialist International was formed to be the voice of the reformist faction. The group would end up, but the organization would end up disbanding in 1940 due to World War II. And everybody was like, okay, we're going to put this on hold for now and just wait. Then in 1951, the Socialist International would be formed to be the successor. As with the war over and reconstruction after that war being essentially done, and like Europe has been rebuilt and whatever, now it was time to move forward and focus on the future. And the Socialist International would remain pretty much with no major conflict until 2013, when a group of the more openly social democratic parties in the group left to form another international called the Progressive Alliance. Now, I have sort of known about Socialist International for a while. Like, I mean, you may have seen that logo on this channel for a while, because I've consistently back and forth used this one to represent democratic socialism, social democracy, whatever. And I have known about the org for a while, but I didn't really pay much attention to it for a variety of reasons. Biggest one being one of the first problems. What do they even do? Like, honestly, I have not seen much from Socialist International, So I don't even know what the heck the organization does. I know political internationals have like pretty little power for the most part. They really don't do much, especially if they're going to trend outside of one continent. Like if an international really stays within the continental borders, then maybe it might have more power, but it really ain't working so well when you try to branch off from people from the literal opposite end of the earth. But Socialist International specifically seems to do the literal bare minimum to qualify as an international. Guess I'm used to seeing stuff like the Comintern having basically complete control over their member parties and certain other internationals being a bit more politically active. But Socialist International literally seems like just a club. Like, I mean, again, like the Comintern, literally, to use them as an example, they literally just controlled all of the parties that were in the Communist International. But then there's also more modern day ones like the Progressive International, not to be confused with the Progressive Alliance, who also remain pretty prevalent in the world scene. But one of the biggest and probably the most definitive problem with the Socialist International really stems from the group itself. For starters, I guess I should just say this. The name is a flat-out lie. The group should really be called Social Democratic International, because that's essentially what it is. Like, they mostly advocate for social democratic changes and not necessarily socialist. Now, I know what you may be saying. Social democracy is technically part of the socialist movement. And yes, that is true to an extent. And to be fair, a lot of parties in the Socialist International do have ties to the socialist movement. For example, one of the groups that is, like go to their Wikipedia, the first group that is listed as a member party of the Socialist International is the Socialist Party of Albania. While technically it is a center-left social democratic party in the country, it used to be the Party of Labor of Albania, which was literally the Communist Party affiliate in Albania. And it is still broadly the furthest left party within the country of Albania. But then you get into some of this weird debate about, like, well, where does certain parts of social democracy begin and certain parts of it? Like, when does the social democratic faction start becoming less, like, actually social democratic and tied to the socialist movement? And when does it just become, like, neoliberalism and stuff? To which it's obvious. It does seem to be. It usually becomes easy when you denote the party as having third way movements. So yeah, the third way is literally, for those who don't remember, I literally just did a video about where I kind of talked about third way. The liberalism video that I just released dabbles about it, but essentially, like, it is where they say, like, oh, this is just the modern day continuation of social democracy, but it's just like, no, you're just moving further to the right. Like the people who would put the sock emoji in their Twitter bio and not the rose emoji at all. And you might be wondering, like, if those parties were included in there, then you might say, yeah, that probably would not count. Well, I include those in, like, I group them with a bunch of other parties where there's 18 member parties of this group that aren't even, like, actually, like, social democratic. Now, again, this ranges from, like, third way to parties that just are literally not social democratic even. Like, not even they're literally, it's like, what are they even doing here? Here's some examples are the Radical Civic Union that is in Argentina, the Radical Party of Chile, the Colombian Liberal Party, the Dominican Revolution Party, the Indian National Congress kind of counts. It's like, it has like this weird thing where it's like, that's where you get into the one weird thing about the sort of International Congress, because, like, one thing many people don't remember is that India is actually a socialist country by definition. It's in their constitution, and a lot of the parties in the International Congress coalition do sort of have tendencies of socialism in there, but it's like, broadly, the party is not socialist. They're like, again, like, to a degree, social democratic or socially liberal. But here's one that is interesting. The Democratic Party of Socialists of Montenegro. I might say, what? But the name says, well, yeah, the name says they are the Democratic Party of Socialists. But if you actually analyze the ideology of the party, you see it ain't nowhere close. Like, let me explain. Here's what it says for the ideology. The party evolved from the League of Communists of Montenegro as a reformist force after Yugoslavia's dissolution. In the 1990s, the party was based on democratic socialism, social democracy, and Serbian-Montenegrin unionism. In the 2000s, the party switched policies towards a common state with Serbia and would become the main proponent of independence of Montenegro in 2006. In the 2010s and 2020s, the party is categorized by a populist, big tent politics with a slight center-left lean, alongside elements of nationalism, pro-European stance against European immigration. The PDS also followed most mainstream center-left social democratic parties, moving to the right since the 1980s as a result of post-war displacement of Keynesianism by embracing third-way economics, but has been described as one of the most radical neoliberal center-left parties. Many consider the party and its 3 decades rule as being a kleptocratic and authoritarian regime. And listen to some information about their current leader, who just lost, Milo Dukanovic. The biggest one that I think very much you would want to know is that he oversaw privatization of public companies of foreign investors and firms. It's like, this guy overly saw privatization. I doubt this guy is really a diehard socialist. And literally, despite the fact that this organization is literally socialist in name only, the Socialist International does not see a problem and just continues to let them in. But the biggest one that should definitely clue you in, that's the Socialist International definitely doesn't know what they're doing, is the International Revolutionary Party being a member of the Socialist International. For those who don't know what that is, the Institutional Revolutionary Party is the PRI in Mexico, Mexico's mainstream neoliberal party, the party that literally has not been socialist since literally the 1930s. In fact, technically, it has never been socialist because the party that used to be the PRI was the socialist one, but when the PRI was formed, that was when they stopped being socialist. And that perfectly leads in to the biggest misstep of the Socialist International. Like, while some of those names might raise some eyebrows, some of those names that you do see, you might realize, wait, there's a pattern with some of the most egregious members in that part, aside from like the Montenegro one that I just showed. It's the biggest gap in the Socialist International's membership and focus. Latin America. Originally, the Socialist International avoided they hardline avoided Latin America. They didn't really see any potential there. For whatever reason, they just didn't see Latin America as a viable place for socialism. You might say maybe it's because a majority of the parties are European and maybe they just had some silent racism. You might say they have continually seen the policies of Latin American socialists in like the United States and saw that might not be that viable. I think they also have a history of avoiding Africa as well, but the more important one for this segment is Latin America. And one of the big things that's interesting is that they remained completely silent on many of the US-backed coups against Latin American leftists. Like, not even like a statement decrying it. Which I think might actually play into sort of like that big thing about social democracy that many people say. Is like, social democracy, it inevitably needs to have exploitation somewhere else in order for it to thrive. So maybe that might be another reason why they didn't really speak that much about Latin American socialism. However, they decided to take a massive shift after Allende's coup. And then they started thinking, maybe we should actually start forming relationships with Latin America, deciding to support the Sandinistas and other groups in the struggle. But there was one big thing. If you actually pay attention to members of the Socialist International, I'll just show you some. If you look at the freaking chart originally, you see there's a lot of like dark red in Europe. Like, Europe is definitely where the Socialist International thrives. I mean, majority of the founders were more than likely Western Social Democrats. They made up a decent amount of the Socialist International. And, of course, interesting thing about Western Social Democrats is that they sometimes are a bit hesitant to support more radical left-wing movements, especially in an area that they're not familiar with, and probably need to have some sort of exploitation to maintain their governments. I mean, to be fair, it's not like there were that many radical left-wing movements in the nations to support anyways. Like, I mean, again, you really only have the Sandinistas and the Cubans, I guess. And, of course, with a lot of the problems with Operation Condor and a lot of other, like, movements within Latin America, you saw that there were not, like, basically any actual left-wing movement in the countries that were either suppressed to basically nothing to, like, basically irrelevant anyways. And what dominated down there was extremely pro-capitalist right-wing parties. And it wasn't really until the 90s where the Socialist International had officially started to, like, actually make relationships with a lot of other, like, Latin American leftists. Like, late 80s, early 90s, I guess. And again, as you can see, there weren't really that many prominent left-wing organizations to form good relationships with. So, what they had to end up doing was they had to end up forming relationships with any movement that was not far-right, which ranged from left-wing movements that were steadily starting to get power again, like the Chilean Socialist Party, to the PRI. Like, even though the PRI literally was one of the groups that was funding, like, right-wing militias and stuff to fight leftist organization, since these guys were not technically far-right, they would get support from the Socialist International. And unfortunately, there weren't that many left-wing parties in Latin America that had viability at the time. So a majority of them were those, like, neo-lib, quote-unquote, social democrat types. And what ended up happening is that these guys, due to the fact that they formed a relationship with the Socialist International, they would end up telling the narrative to Socialist International of what is going on in Latin America. And I'm pretty sure they would end up telling Socialist International, like, oh yeah, we're like the, like, actual, like, social democratic, like, left-wing groups, like, we're like what these guys are. But, like, these groups, whatever these guys are, like, they're like the super far, these guys are like borderline communists, dude. You shouldn't support them. And Socialist International's like, yeah, sure. Now, you'd think that eventually this would have corrected itself, like, maybe after the rise of the pink tide, like, you know, maybe we might actually see some changes, and they'd actually start shifting their focus to help support the pink tide. Well, nope. Quite far from it, because by the time the pink tide started rolling around, the Socialist International had already made itself known in Latin America, and it was now known in Latin America as the party that rubbed shoulders with the neoliberals. So any actual left-wing movement down there in Latin America didn't want to form any relationship with Socialist International because the Socialist International was supporting and backing organizations that were opposing them. And due to the fact that these left-wing parties down there don't support the Socialist International, the Socialist International sees that as vindication. Like, see, this is proof that these guys are like far-left commies because they're not supporting us. Even though we have done literally nothing to indicate that we would make a good alliance, we're going to be mad at them for not forming an alliance with us. And to this day, many of these organizations are still being supported by the Socialist International, even to this day. The PRI is still part of Socialist International. Like, they didn't even, like, shift their support to any of them. They did have the PRD join as an observer member at one point, but that group is not affiliated with them anymore, I don't think. And they sure as heck haven't started forming relationships with Morena, or PT. Of course, in Argentina, they support the Radical Civic Union over any party in the Frente de Todos coalition. Venezuela, of course, has them support the Popular Will, A New Era, and Democratic Action parties over PSUV. Literally, those three parties are in the group, but not PSUV. And Popular Will, if I remember correctly, that was literally Juan Guaido's party. Do you guys are really building yourself up as being like a very prevalent force in Latin American leftism? One that might not be as egregious, technically, is them supporting PDT over PT in Brazil. Because technically, PDT, at least on paper, isn't that bad of a party. In practice, we of course see that it is not really living up to expectations, especially with the whole thing that was going on with them basically painting themselves as a centrist in the Brazilian election against Lula and Bolsonaro. But I think there is actually one party, one group in this whole thing that I really do believe is like the biggest nail in the coffin. Like you might say, wait, the PRI isn't the nail in the coffin? Oh, it was one of them. But the final one comes from this. One of the parties in the Socialist International is the National Unity Front, a social democratic, third-way, economic liberal, center-to-center-left party. Right off the bat, definitely like, oh, this doesn't seem like a party that would be in the Socialist International. But wait, it gets better. The party was formed in the year 2003 and managed to mount a presidential campaign 3 election cycles in a row, 2005, 2009, and 2014. Now, to reveal, finally, the country that this party is in, it is a party in the country of Bolivia. And if you remember, 2003 was after Evo Morales' first run for the presidency. This was a party that was made in reaction to Evo Morales. So, again, right off the bat, seems a little bit suspect, especially since these guys have run against Evo Morales 3 times. Strange that the Socialist International would be supporting a party like this, but there's actually 2 more interesting things that make this way worse. This party was added in 2017 as a member of the Socialist International. Yeah, this wasn't like a holdout from the 90s or something. This was an incredibly recent addition to the Socialist International. And one of the reasons why they added him to the Socialist International was it was due to lead up to the upcoming election. And they were like doing this whole thing about like spreading the Western narrative. Like, oh, Evo Morales is like turning his country into disarray because of the whole constitutional referendum thing. But wait, it gets a little bit interesting. On April 5th of this year, their party leader, Samuel Doria Medina, became the vice president of Socialist International in Latin America. He was that guy who ran against Evo Morales 3 times. But wait, I've saved the best piece of information for last. He has not just run for the presidency of Bolivia. He also briefly sought the vice presidency of Bolivia, and in a coalition, even. You want to know who was the leader of his coalition? Janine Áñez. Yeah, they literally, like Socialist International, this group that's supposed to like be pushing for socialism around the world, is literally running with a guy who is literally a member of who was like the supporter of a far-right candidate for president, again, who like literally overthrew the democratically elected socialist government of that country. Yeah, by the end of researching this, I started to realize, Socialist International doesn't even qualify with my problems with, because the whole point of this series is that it's supposed to be, I'm supposed to like say negative things about a positive organization, but all I'm seeing is a lot of negatives. But then again, when am I ever going to talk about the Socialist International ever? When is anybody going to talk about the Socialist International ever? So yeah, this is my problems with the Socialist International. It is literally not even the best international group that I could think of. I think we all know which one it is. So yeah, anyways, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video mine comes out. And for some more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.